After a hiatus from American ships, I think we should come back to the United States Navy and take a look at my personal favorite battleship, USS New Jersey. She's even my computer background. Now, the Iowa class would see service intermittently from the Second World War starting in August 1943 until March of 1992, with the design of the Iowa class being the pinnacle of U.S. battleships that were actually built. Although the North Carolina and South Dakota classes were certainly a step up, especially in speed as compared to the pre-1922 battleships, with the withdrawal of the Japanese from the Naval Treaty System, it would provide an opportunity for the designers of the United States to design a battleship relatively unconstrained by any treaty limits, resulting in a ship with a design top speed of 33 knots. Starting our story off when Japan and Italy withdrew from the Naval Treaty System at the Second London Naval Conference in January of 1936, the United States, as well as Great Britain and France, would add escalation clauses to the displacement and armament restrictions originally set in the 1922 Washington Naval Treaty, which was a displacement of 35,000 tons and 16-inch guns. With the Japanese not only withdrawing but becoming more secretive with their building program, on March 31, 1938, the United States, Great Britain, and France would invoke the escalation clause to raise the displacement limit to 45,000 tons. With both the North Carolina and South Dakota classes starting previously, having their primary objectives focused around maximizing armor and armament with speed a secondary thought. Nevertheless, with a top speed of 27 knots, the battleships were a considerable step ahead of the standard class battleships and the other pre-1922 battleships, and with these ships they could keep up with the carriers and provide an escort, something that the older battleships could not do. Not only that, but they were thought to be able to match the top speed of the Japanese Congo class, of which at the time the United States Navy assumed to have a top speed of 26 knots. But with their modernizations in the mid-1930s, the Congos would have a top speed of 30 knots. But with the increase in tonnage from 35,000 to 45,000 tons, it would provide an opportunity for the General Board of the United States to either increase the main armament from 9 16-inch guns to 12 16-inch guns and keep the 27-knot top speed, or they could increase the top speed of the new battleships to be in excess of 30 knots. President Roosevelt would play a major role in March of 1938, deciding that the new battleships should have an increase in speed and an increased cruising range. Another major factor for the discussion of fast battleships in the United States Navy was the need to fight a trans-Pacific war against the Japanese, with the idea being the climax of the war resulting in a decisive battleship duel somewhere in the Western Pacific, of which it was assumed that the Japanese would try to preserve their battle line until this culminating battle, as well as using their land-based aircraft and using their battle cruisers, and carrier forces to raid and harass the older U.S. battleships as they crossed the vast Pacific. With the need to counter and overwhelm the Japanese Congos, and then overwhelm the Japanese battle line being the main driving force behind the battleship construction, another major factor was the Panama Canal, as the design criteria for the new ships called for them to be able to transit the canal connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. In doing so, it meant that their width could not exceed that of the canal, along with numerous other factors. Another need the General Board saw was that of a fast-striking force being comprised of carriers, cruisers, and fast battleships that would be able to parry any Japanese thrust that might strike at the battle line or raid the various Japanese bases in the Pacific, like Truk or the Mandate Islands, the Marianas, Marshalls, or the Carolines. Not only that, but to harass the Japanese fleet and bring it to battle. The carriers in this striking force were to provide in-depth reconnaissance and to protect the fast battleships from air attack from other carriers or land-based aircraft. With all this being said, by May of 1938, USS Iowa and New Jersey were formally authorized for construction, with the New Jersey being built in the Philadelphia Naval Yard. The design for the Iowa class would draw heavily from that of the South Dakota and North Carolina classes, and a quote from U.S. fast battleships in 1938 to 1991, the Iowa class by Lawrence Burr, quote, "The South Dakota class for the form and structure of its armor protection, and the North Carolina class for its bow and hull shape," end quote. For the ships to achieve a 33-knot top speed, they would need 230,000 shaft horsepower. Contrary to the previous classes, the Iowas would revert back to separate boiler and engine rooms on an alternating basis. Along with that, in an effort to curb any flooding damage from a torpedo hit, 3 transverse bulkheads were added to strengthen the machinery spaces and decrease any potential flooding. With speed trumping any increase in firepower from 9 main battery guns to 12, the caliber of the guns would increase from 45 to 50. With this increase in barrel length and heavier powder charge, it would give the Iowas a muzzle velocity of 2,500 feet per second, as compared to the 2,300 feet per second for the 16-inch 45 caliber guns. This increase in muzzle velocity would result in a longer maximum range for the Iowas and superior armor penetrating capabilities over their fellow fast battleships. Now, due to miscommunications between designers, guns would have to be redesigned, encompassing a smaller slide and slimmer yoke so it would be able to fit in the same size turret as a 45 caliber gun. The Iowas would be equipped with the same dual-purpose 5-inch 38 caliber secondaries found in the South Dakotas and the North Carolinas. A larger 6-inch 47 caliber gun was considered, but its weight would have been too heavy to fit the displacement limit of 45,000 tons the Navy wanted. The Iowas would have a sweeping weather deck, which was introduced in the North Carolinas, along with a very large superstructure, with a four-funnel fared into the rear of the superstructure fire control tower. The size and positioning of the boiler rooms would require two funnels, with the aft funnel structure providing a base for multiple anti-aircraft gun platforms. As for fire control, the Ford Instrument Mark 8 Rangekeeper was the heart of the main armament fire control system for the Iowa class. And to quote again from U.S. Fast Battleships 1938 to 1991, the Iowa class, quote, "This mechanical analog computer consolidated the input from optical and radar rangefinders for range bearing and target speed. It included own ship movements in all axes for the Mark 41 stable vertical gyroscope, and ballistic details, wind, atmospheric pressure, and gun conditions. It then calculated future target range, gun deflection, and time of flight, thus providing the required gun elevation and turret train input to the guns electronically." End quote. In addition, the Iowas would carry a radar for air and surface search, with the New Jersey, Iowa, and Wisconsin being fit with the SK bedspring radar, being able to locate aircraft up to 100 miles out, but they were restricted to 10,000 feet of elevation. While the surface SG radar sets were fit two per ship, being able to locate targets 20 miles out and aircraft at 15 miles out and at 500 feet of elevation. The Iowas would also carry three aircraft used for spotting the fall of shot from the main battery when they were performing long-range gunfire. These would be the OS-2U Vought Skorsky Kingfisher. The Kingfishers were launched from catapults at the stern of the ship. Let's get into some more details about the New Jersey. She would begin construction at the Philadelphia Navy Yard on September 16, 1940. She would have a standard displacement of 45,000 tons and a full load displacement, as of 1945, of 57,540 tons. As for machinery, she would carry 8 Babcock and Wilcox boilers and 4 Westinghouse geared turbines, producing 212,000 shaft horsepower, a bit under the required 230,000 shaft horsepower previously mentioned. However, the ship would still achieve a top speed of 33 knots. As for armor, she would have a belt of 12.1 inches, a maximum bulkhead thickness of 11.2 inches, an armored deck of 5 inches, a conning tower of 17.3 inches, barbettes of 17.3 inches, and the turrets would have armor thickness of 17 inches on the face, 9.5 inches on the sides, 12 on the back, and the roof would have 7.25 inches of armor. Her battery as of June 1944 would consist of 9 16-inch 50 caliber guns and 3 triple turrets, with 2 super-firing forward and 1 aft, 20 dual-purpose 5-inch 38 caliber guns and twin turrets, 16 quadruple 40mm mounts, and 49 20mm single mounts. It should be mentioned that her anti-aircraft armament would be augmented throughout the Second World War. She would be laid down in September of 1940, launched in December of 1942, and commissioned in May of 1943. An interesting note to start off New Jersey's career, she would be launched on the first anniversary of the Pearl Harbor attack on December 7, 1942. With fitting out complete by the 23rd of May, 1943, the ship and crew began a shakedown cruise in the western Atlantic and Caribbean before heading into the Pacific, transiting the Panama Canal on the 7th of January, 1944. Once in the Pacific, she would join Task Group 58.3 under the command of Rear Admiral Frederick Sherman, a unit within the U.S. Fifth Fleet under the command of Admiral Raymond A. Spruance. On the 4th of February, she became the flagship of the Fifth Fleet. Not only that, but along with Iowa, she created Battleship Division 7. And a quote from Learning War, The Evolution of Fighting Doctrine in the U.S. Navy, 1898 to 1945, by Trent Hone, quote, "With Bat Div 7, Task Group 58.3 could outfight any enemy surface forces it could not outrun. If a major Japanese counterattack ensued, Sherman would fall back on the forces at Kwajalein." End quote. Now, in this, Hone was referring to Operation Flintlock, the invasion of the Marshall Islands. First would come a raid against Truk, while the plan was to cover the landings at Eniwetok by neutralizing the powerful Japanese base at Truk. New Jersey would be in Task Force 58.3, along with the other battleships North Carolina, Iowa, Massachusetts, South Dakota, and Alabama, with the fleet carrier Bunker Hill and the light carriers Monterey and Cowpens. The 6 fast battleships were meant to be concentrated to be ready to deploy and engage the enemy, while the older battleships and amphibious forces were left behind. By the time the first airstrikes were hitting Truk on the 17th of February, most Japanese heavy units had withdrawn from the area, but there was a large amount of shipping found in the area. With that in mind, some of the light forces attempted to escape, and with that, Spruance sent Bat Div 7 accompanied by 2 heavy cruisers and 4 destroyers to go attack these units, which consisted of the light cruiser Katori, 2 destroyers the Mayakaze and the Noakai, along with the minesweeper Shonan Maru. At 3 p.m., the Shonan Maru was spotted and destroyers had immobilized her. While at 3:27, the range had fallen to 800 yards, and the New Jersey fired on the minesweeper with her secondaries and sinking her. The New Jersey secondaries would go on to sink the Mayakaze, not before she fired torpedoes at the New Jersey, which missed, and then both Iowa and New Jersey would begin firing at the Noakai at a range of 32,000 yards at 3:47 p.m., pursuing the Japanese destroyers at a speed in excess of 32 knots. The Noakai would speed away into the setting sun, and fire eventually ceased at 3:58. While this was going on, 3 air attacks were made on U.S. ships, but no damage was sustained. Following this action, the 2 battleships sailed around Truk Lagoon, flying the large victory flags. As a way to show the power of the United States Navy, Spruance could sail around what some consider Japan's Pearl Harbor in terms of fortifications and importance, without too many consequences. Anyway, in The Fleet at Flood Tide by James D. Hornfisher, and in some of the other readings I've done, I remember criticism of Spruance during this action, as his actions could be seen as reckless, especially taking in consideration those air attacks and the torpedoes fired by the Mayakaze that missed the New Jersey. Anyway, I'd be interested to hear all of your thoughts about his actions in taking Task Group 50.9 around Truk. Following this, New Jersey would stop at Kwajalein and then replenish at Majuro, while Spruance would fly to Hawaii to meet with Commander-in-Chief Pacific Area or SINCPAC Chester Nimitz. While this was going on, New Jersey was off bombarding a Japanese base at Mille Atoll in the Marshalls on March 18, 1944. The Japanese would return fire and straddle New Jersey. On the 23rd, Spruance would reboard his flagship at Majuro, leading the fleet 2,000 miles west. The New Jersey would protect the carriers as they struck the Japanese combined fleet's base in Palau on March 30th and April 1st, 1944, forcing the combined fleet to withdraw, compelling its commander, Miniichi Koga, to flee in a flying boat that was lost in a typhoon. During this attack, New Jersey's 5-inch guns shot down an aircraft on the night of March 29th. While returning to Majuro, the New Jersey would guard the carriers as they struck bases in the Caroline Islands. On the 10th of April, Spruance would shift his flag to the heavy cruiser Indianapolis. On the 13th, the New Jersey, along with the 5th Fleet, sailed to support amphibious landings by General Douglas MacArthur and the 7th Fleet against Japanese-held New Guinea, in which New Jersey would escort carriers as they struck Hollandia, Atape, Tanamara Bay, and Humboldt Bay. Again, as they returned to Majuro, New Jersey would guard the carriers as they struck Japanese vessels and aircraft remaining at Truk on the 29th through 30th. New Jersey herself would help to down 2 Japanese planes attacking the fleet, later bombarding Ponape Island in the Carolines on the 1st of May, along with 6 other battleships, and to take from Trent Hone's book once more. These strikes effectively ended the usefulness of Truk as a base for the Japanese, eliminating a major hub of their defensive network. End quote. As like some of the other videos more recently, I'll have to split up New Jersey's career into some separate videos, as it would be a lot to cover her whole career in one video. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed our discussion about the development of the Iowa class, as I have left some of it a little vague intentionally, as I hope to cover more ships of the class and maybe do a full development video on them. In the next part, we'll continue her service in the Second World War, and please let me know down in the comments whether or not you want me to cover her career past the Second World War. It will certainly be far out of the scope we mainly cover, but it might be a good change of pace. Anyway, until next time, my friends, I wish you all good luck this week.